Hi, everyone. Today I'm talking to my friend Ron. I was going to call you Bob.
Oh, that wouldn't have worked.
My friend Ron is here, another one of the great men at the Senior Center that I've met through that one place. It's great to find one place that you can go back to and keep getting to know people. So Ron is here, and just give me a little background. How old? Oh, I wanted to include how old you are too. Okay.
Okay, well, I just had a birthday and I'm 81. Um, my career was practicing law, and I did that for 25 years with a plan. When I was about halfway through my practice, my plan was to retire early so I could do everything that was on my bucket list. And there were a lot of things on my bucket list that required physical ability. So I wanted to make sure I retired early enough to have the physical ability to do those things. So my plan was, and what I did was retire at age 52. I did a little consulting for 2 or 3 years, but essentially I left the practice of law when I was 52. My bucket list was rather lengthy. It had quite a bit of international travel on it, and I did all that. Went to Africa a couple of times, went to New Zealand for a month and a half, Costa Rica for a month, places like that.
Nice.
I wanted to see the world as much as I could, and I made a point to spend as much time as I could at these various locations. Like New Zealand, I planned a month and a half, and I wish now I'd planned about 4 months because I fell in love with the whole country. Right after I retired, I decided I wanted to be a school teacher. And they asked me what grade I wanted to teach. And I told them I wanted to make sure I was teaching kids that were smaller than me and dumber than me. And they put me in 5th grade initially, and that didn't work very well because there were some kids with attitudes. And I went from 5th grade down to 1st and 2nd. And that I fell in love with the kids.
Did you?
And I did it for 3 years. The problem was I couldn't hear the little girls. When they would talk to me, I had to be right next to them. And that's just my hearing problem, which I had not corrected at that point. About the time I got towards the end of my teaching career, the 3-year commitment, I was offered a job with an outfitter as a hunting guide. And I had done that in Arizona while I was still practicing law. I was a licensed hunting guide. So I decided to do it. And I went to work for Great Divide Outfitters, owned by a local, at that time, deputy sheriff named Dan Newman. And I worked with him for 9 years as a hunting guide and a wrangler, and all of our camps were accessible only by horseback.
So you were at this point late 50s.
I was somewhere in my mid to late 50s.
And you did it for 12 years?
I did it for 9 years.
9 years. And just give us a brief little synopsis of some of the tasks you have to do to be an outfitter, especially at that age. I think it's extremely admirable. You had to be in shape. So just give us some idea what that entailed.
Well, let's just take a typical day. It starts at 6 in the morning. You have to be at the trailhead at 6 in the morning. We had a big barn, and that's where we kept the horses. And we would get the horses all ready.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how many people we had going in, hunters, but typically we'd have 6 to 8 hunters, and so we'd get our horses ready for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would show up with all their gear, and we would pack all their gear on pack horses.
Mm-hmm.
And my job primarily was to take the hunters, the dudes we called them, but hunters, and my job was to take them up to camps. We had, at that time, we had 3 separate camps. And some went to what's called the deluxe camp, and other ones went to what was called the drop camps. Taking the dudes up was much simpler than some of the other chores. Some of the other chores involved lifting heavy items and putting them in panniers, and some of that was pushing my limits at my age.
Mm-hmm. And we're talking like some of those items are a quarter of an animal or something.
Well, to bring them down.
To bring them down.
Going up, we hauled, for example, we'd haul 4 jugs of 8 gallons of water in per jug, and that gets heavy.
Yeah.
You've got to lift them up and then put them in the panniers, 2 on each side, so it's even for the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot of work.
That's really good for a 60-year-old.
Yeah, it was. Kept me in shape.
I bet it did.
But I'd take the dudes into camp was my primary job, and then orientate them as best as I could as to the country as we were riding in. To our deluxe camp was about a 2-hour ride.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the hunters had ridden before and some had not.
Mm-hmm.
So along with my duties, I had to make sure they were comfortable, and I had to make sure they were watched carefully so that if they started doing things that weren't smart, I could tell them gracefully.
Yes.
As far as the animals, once they got shot an animal, we explained to them what they needed to do, but we also would ride up every day and be available if they needed us to process the animal on the mountain.
Oh, okay.
And their job then was to typically to quarter them up, to skin them, save the cape, quarter them up, and bring it down the mountain, and then take them to a meat processor.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then, so you did that for 9 years to keep in shape.
Keeping in shape.
That's a lot of work. And then what?
Well, then in the process there somewhere, I had loved playing poker. So I got into a poker league that plays once a week. And I play with the same 25, 30 people that we've played with for probably 30 years now.
That's so cool.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And I also renewed my interest in playing pool, and which is how you and I met.
Right.
At the senior center, because they have a wonderful pool table, and I'm able to play 3 days a week in the morning, and then 2 of those days I have lunch also.
Mm-hmm.
I'm dating a lady that is a very good friend of mine, and I live by myself, but I live on a small little ranch, and my daughter and son-in-law live in a house on the same ranch. So it's like I have company if I want it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And you don't have company when you don't want it.
They don't bother me.
That's so great.
I have to ask for help.
Which is good.
It's really good. And my son-in-law literally saved my life. I had a terrible heart attack just a year and a half ago. And my son-in-law, who's a retired fireman, saw me out by the house, and I was looking for oxygen. And he said, "Get in my truck quick."
Mm-hmm.
And he took me to the hospital. And it was an emergency completely. I couldn't breathe. And he saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm indebted to him for that. And then he married my daughter in a helicopter.
Oh,
That's a story that he would have to tell, but I know part of it. And the helicopter landed at the ranch next to mine and picked up he and my daughter and took them up. Never landed because they wanted to go up to Wilderness. They had a place they loved to pack into. Took them up to Wilderness, flew over the spot, got married there, and brought them back.
Oh, what a great story.
Oh, it was wonderful. And then we had a big get together at the house that evening with all kinds of people. And it was wonderful. And it was just a most remarkable wedding I'm aware of. Unfortunately, because it was a helicopter, I didn't get to go, but and nobody did except my son-in-law and my daughter. But it was quite an event.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it really was.
So it sounds like you get out pretty regularly. Do you have any challenges about getting out? Is there anything that you're hesitant to get involved in at this point in your life, as far as socializing or being around people or being out in your community?
No, to answer your question, I'm not hesitant at all. Mm-hmm. I'm probably just the opposite.
Okay.
I have a tendency I'm sort of an A personality, but I enjoy people, and I enjoy all kinds of people. And I have a tremendous curiosity about what makes things work, including people. Mm-hmm. When they tell me they have a certain profession or occupation, I want to hear about it, mm-hmm. Unless it's something that I happen to know. But the great majority of the people I meet, like at the senior center or somewhere else, they're doing things that interest me. And mm-hmm. so I like to learn about them. And mm-hmm. sometimes I find out after I learn that that's what I'd like to do for a while. Not that I'm going to take over your job. Yes. Your job is not my job.
You don't want to be a content creator.
I'm not going to do that, no.
Well, look, you're doing it right now.
Well,
that's as close as you're getting.
That's as close as I want to be to a camera.
I'm the same way, though. I find people's vocations and what they're able to do in their hobbies really fascinating.
Oh, totally.
Really fascinating, because it's things that you never thought to do usually, or never had any connection with before these people, and then sometimes they're so passionate about it.
Oh yeah.
And you get, just like you say, you get excited and say, I want to try that. Very cool.
Exactly. That's exactly what happens and some of it, there's a couple of things that I've done that I did because somebody told me about it, and it sounded like it would be fun. Mm-hmm. And so I did it, But I think probably the highlight of my retirement was the working as a guide, because I love the outdoors.
Yeah.
And what better country to be in than right around Durango? Mm-hmm. There's so much beautiful country, and all of our camps were either in wilderness or at the edge of wilderness. Mm-hmm. And that makes for a very, as most people know, that's no motorized equipment at all. Mm-hmm. Everything is done by hand or horseback. Mm-hmm. And it's just remarkable country. And I got to spend 9 years in it.
That's very cool.
Doing good stuff.
Yeah.
Enjoyable stuff.
That's great.
Yeah.
After you retired. In your golden years.
In my golden years.
In your golden years.
Correct.
Okay, so you mentioned that you don't get lonely. Mm-hmm. You don't have any loneliness, depression, anxiety. Most of us old people do.
No,
none.
I'm an avid reader.
Okay.
And that is besides out of curiosity,
Mhm.
but it's also entertainment for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I do a lot of reading. While I was in the hospital almost 2.5 months because things were complicated when I had the heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
And I read 48 books during that 2.5 months.
Wow.
I just was reading constantly, except when the doctors were there
Wow.
or friends coming to visit or something. But the rest of the time I read.
Do you have one specific genre, or do you
I
read everything?
I read almost everything. In my career I had to read in the average of 2 to 3 hours a day,
Mm-hmm.
and all educational.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got into retirement, I loved to read, but I didn't want to spend it on educational. I wanted to entertain myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started reading Grisham and then James Patterson and Sandra Brown and all kinds of different mystery writers.
Mm-hmm.
That's my favorite right now. And I'd say that's probably the most books I've read has been one of those authors.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. That's great. You very briefly put in there that you're dating an old friend. Do you date other women? How long have you been friends?
I haven't dated anyone else in quite a while except her.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just really good friends, and we enjoy our company, and we both love football, and so we're avid Bronco fans.
Mm-hmm.
And she's lived here most of her professional life, so she's very well acquainted around town,
Mm-hmm.
and her husband passed away a few years ago, but he was a fairly prominent citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a real special lady.
That's
but,
great.
But we're just really good friends,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know. And that might lead to something else. You never know. I'm not opposed to things going whatever direction they go.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. I wanted to talk a little bit more about your heart attack. Okay. And did it change anything in your regular life? I mean, going through a heart attack is it's kind of a messes with your mind, I think. a lot.
A lot.
A lot. And because you had complications too, that was probably even more of a challenge to get over it after you had the heart attack. So
Mm-hmm.
is there anything that you ran up against that you didn't expect in that experience, and anything you did differently to get over it that might be helpful to somebody that's had some kind of medical challenge?
Well, because of the length of my initial stay in the hospital, which was brought about because of complications, um, um, I really atrophied quite a bit.
Mm.
I lost a lot of muscle strength. For example, I could have never gone back to working on the mountain
Mm-hmm.
or helping dudes or nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't have the physical ability yet.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I've learned over the course of the last year and a half is that exercise is the key to rehabbing. And if you're serious about your rehab, then you got to be very serious about your exercise. You know, right now I do typically about 2 to 3 hours a day of pretty significant exercise.
Mm.
It's all designed to slowly rebuild my body,
Mm-hmm.
and it's real slow, and I get frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
You asked me if I have any anxiety or anything. I would say that the one area that I get a little bit anxious about is how slow the recovery is.
Mm-hmm.
if unfortunately, if you should have a heart attack and require a lot of hospitalization, you need to be prepared for extensive rehab, long duration.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to my therapist more than once about my frustrations, and she said to me, "You need to go back to what it was like when you were in the hospital, and when you were they were teaching you how to walk." And I forget about that.
Oh, wow.
But literally, I had to learn how to walk over again because my body wasn't ready for it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't ready for any kind of exercise. So
Wow.
I was in organized rehab for about 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to my house, and then I had a therapist come in 4 days a week to work with me on various exercises and stuff.
Wow.
The whole thing has been, it's a major setback, but I was also at the point where I was doing more traveling than any work anyway, so I didn't have to give up a lot of physical activities, but I've had to limit my traveling just because I have to see doctors periodically. I have to go to cardiologists. I have to go to other ones that are involved in my rehabilitation efforts. So I don't have the freedom to travel like I like to travel.
Oh.
I love traveling. Even in today's world, things are different than
A lot different.
back when I was doing more traveling, but
Mm-hmm.
I still would I would go back to Africa again. I loved Africa.
Is there anything else you want to add?
The one kind of a conversation I had with the principal of Riverview back when I was teaching,
Mm-hmm.
she told me that I was the first trial lawyer that had ever taught in her schools. And she had been a school principal or teacher for 25, 30 years.
Wow.
And I said, well, I'm the first trial lawyer that I know of that's gone into elementary education.
That's a switch.
That's a switch.
You aren't going to see that out there.
And I learned a lot.
Yeah, I bet you did.
Oh, they've had so much new language that I'd never heard before. But I had student teachers help me, thank heaven.
I didn't think about the new language.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I remember being totally frustrated one day. I went into class, and that day I had to work with a group of difficult students.
Mm-hmm.
And my assignment for the day was to educate them on, quote, convenient numbers. And I got to school early that morning, but I had no idea what a convenient number was. I don't know
what a convenient number is.
Well, I went around, and finally I went to a couple of teachers, and they weren't sure. They didn't do math, so they weren't really sure, but it was about math.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally went to a student, and he said, oh, yeah, that's what you old guys used to call rounding off.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a convenient number. Now you know.
Okay, convenient.
So you're ready to
just
teach school.
Convenient, that number.
It's a convenient number because you're rounding off to it.
So, okay, so you go from a trial attorney and a very successful, high-powered trial attorney too.
Thank you.
He's very humble, but we all know what he did.
Thank you.
And very intense trial attorney, and you go to teaching second graders, first graders,
and not knowing all the curriculum.
So, how did you feel about that? I mean, were you intimidated? Did you try and use some of the same skill sets with managing the kids? Did that work? Like, tell me some of that.
I faked it a lot.
Did you?
Oh yeah. And again, I had a student teacher most of the time, and they did know.
Oh,
Although I didn't
okay.
have a student teacher when I had the troubled kids class, but I did. For example, I taught Autistic for several weeks, and I had student teachers in there to help me because that was a very, very, very difficult, very rewarding,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you'd see one of them. So many of them were talented in computers,
Mm.
but not in any verbal skills.
Mm-hmm.
So they wouldn't talk to you about something, but they would type it up on a computer. And it was very interesting reading. I mean,
Yeah.
it was much, it seemed to be coming from somebody much older. But I really enjoyed the autistic classes, very rewarding.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So life doesn't end after 50, obviously.
No, thank
Even
heaven.
after a heart attack that almost killed him for many months, it still didn't end your
No, we
life.
just got to rearrange the schedule. And
There you
that's all
go.
there is to it.
Oh, that's good. Rearrange your schedule for some more fun. Just keep living. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.